And I started to try and write this song, and that wasn't coming together like the paintings. I thought, this isn't happening in the same way. And then one afternoon, I was just kind of like watching this old movie on the TV, and I was watching it, and I was just kind of playing around. I got this keyboard out, and then suddenly this little chord progression happened, and I thought, oh, I like that. That sounds really good. So I recorded it on the cassette, and I started to develop it. I thought, this is not meant to be a song. It's meant to be it's something played by an orchestra. Yeah. And so I thought that's where I'm taking it. And I had that same sense of like, nothing was going to stop me, just like the paintings. I thought, let's go, So I started to develop that on this little cheap old synthesizer. And one of the people who used to come in and have yoga sessions played cello in the local orchestra, and we became friends. She was quite spiritual, and we used to go for coffee. So I started telling her about this piece of music, and she laughed and said, "Oh, maybe we could perform it." And I thought, wow. Yeah, why not? That'd be great. So, so I got in touch with my brother, and he said, look, you can't just like hand out cassettes to an orchestra and say, here's all the parts,
And
You've
your
got
brother
to-
was a member of that orchestra also playing French horn.
Yeah, not in that orchestra. No, he was playing French orchestra. He lived down in London, so he was down there. So he said, well, you'll need music score. And I said, well, I can't write music. I can't even read music. He said,
Yeah,
that's okay.
you're an old punk rocker, right? That was the extent of your
Exactly, that's
musical
it.
experience.
All I could do was thrash out 3 chords just about on a guitar. And so he said to me, listen, I'm going to give you, an old computer of mine. And he said, and then I'm going to give you this app. And he said, when you play the keyboard I'm going to give you, that it will transpose those notes that you're playing into a musical format, And so, and then he said, give it back to me, and then I'll look through it, And I said, great. And so we did that together, and then I printed off the parts, and I told them, the orchestra, this is where I was at and stuff. And they said, well, let's meet for coffee. So I met up with my friend, and also with the conductor and a few other people, and they looked at the score, and I was amazed because I thought they'd want to hear what I'd done, and they could tell just by reading music what it was going to sound like. I was shocked. I said, you don't even want to hear what I've done on the cassette. They said, no, we can get it from here. This is really good, So they said, we'll perform it. So I said, fantastic. So yeah,
That's great. It was quite a story, actually, because I think they only practiced it once before the performance, or maybe twice, I don't know. But they were so good that they could just do that. They were all professional level musicians. Then you had this debut performance of your symphony, which was three movements by that time, a full symphony.
oh, yeah.
And with all the different, you had to write like the lines of music for each separate thing, right? For the strings, for the horns, for the percussion, everything.
I started
amazing.
to realize, just like with the paintings, that there was more textures than just violins. I used to think classical music was just violins. No, and I started to realize, no, there's more instruments that I can use. And in fact, it was my brother said that. I said, why don't you start using, you said, you just got strings, you've got cellos and violins, you start using other stuff, And I was going like, what? And he said, well, like French horn for starters. I was going, I've already got French horn in there, actually, because you play it. So, and then I started throwing in other instruments, and then I started to realize it was giving, this piece of music more dimension, more color, and it was starting to come alive even more. And the only reason I could do this was because the synthesizer had like, very cheap synthetic sounds of a trumpet or what have you, so I could pretty much roughly hear how that was going to come together. But the rehearsal itself, that was mind-blowing, because I turned up to the first rehearsal and I was incredibly nervous because I thought, is this just going to like come tumbling down, like a block of bricks, and stuff, and or is it going to come together? So I had faith, but at the same time I was nervous because I knew nothing about all this. And I walked in, and also the orchestra, they were lovely people, but it's quite a sort of foreboding sort of, sort of setup. They don't really give much away, classical musicians, so they don't turn around and say, this is great, it's like, so I didn't know what to think. So I walked in, and the conductor said, "Oh, the composer's here," and I was going, "What? No, it's me. I'm not the composer." And he said, "David, would you like to come forward and say a few words?" And I said, "No, it's fine. You just go ahead." He said, "Come on." So I stepped up, and And I started telling them what it was about. I talked about the near-death experience, and people were asking me loads of questions. I thought, this is great. People were really keen to know what it was about, and that helped me to have faith. And so I went and sat down, and when the baton came down on those opening chords, it was just like, it was like hearing that cheap little Spanish synthesizer that I got suddenly becoming into this massive 3-dimensional stereo. You know, it was like, it was huge and it was beautiful.